Welcome to Crossroads. I'm your host, Joshua Philipp, and today we have Brendan Steinhauser. He's here to talk to us about his work as one of the founders of the Tea Party and kind of where he's gone from there and where the movement has gone from there. So Brandon, real nice to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So tell us a bit about, now the Tea Party was an interesting movement. It was, from what I got on the surface, it was a new political party meant to kind of get rid of both the Republican and the Democrat systems, which I think a lot of us saw now that you had rhinos, right? Republican in name onlys, and Democrats who were, just acting for their interests that go against, I think, traditional American values. And then the Tea Party came about and said, we're going to do something totally different, and we're going to start a party that represents what the values America was built on. And of course, the Obama administration used some pretty underhanded measures to destroy that movement, including, doing things to the IRS, which really, I'm surprised they got away with what they did. But regardless, I think that the issues that the Tea Party started, even though the Tea Party is probably not really alive anymore, but the spirit of the movement is I think, dominating current politics in a lot of ways. And what are your thoughts about this? And can you tell us a bit about why you did, you started that when you did?
Sure. Well, yeah, it's an important conversation to have, to kind of look back and see how the Tea Party movement has infused really the Republican Party mostly, but actually our whole political system with ideas and values that have made a big impact in elections, but also in our culture. The Tea Party movement was founded in February of 2009. It was motivated by and inspired by, of course, the original Boston Tea Party, a protest by Americans against British imperialism and taxation and monopolistic practices. But the Tea Party was founded because millions of people were fed up with kind of how both parties had spent too much money. It arose in response to the Wall Street bailouts of the fall of 2008 as well. That played into it a lot. But it was very much a protest against big spending, big government, and the people that subscribed to the Tea Party, were members of the Tea Party movement, very much believed in free markets, individual liberty, capitalism, and the power of the individual. It really took shape as a movement first, a protest movement, and throughout the spring and summer of 2009, it started to develop into more of an actual political movement and started to recruit candidates to run for office, mostly in the Republican primary, sometimes challenging incumbent Republicans and defeating them. So it became a real political force throughout 2009 and into 2010, when Republicans actually won 63 House seats and 6 Senate seats. And most of that energy and most of that organization came from the Tea Party movement.
And of course, the Obama administration took action to prevent that from happening.
They did.
Can you talk about what happened?
Well, I remember sitting at my desk in Washington at the time. I was working for FreedomWorks, and we were getting a lot of calls from activists who were saying, we're trying to get our 501c3 status so that we can kind of become more of an official organization in our community. We want to do education on issues and all this sort of stuff. And they were getting these letters back from the IRS asking all kinds of very intrusive information about personal behavior, about personal financial questions, their spouse and their relatives' personal financial situations, all sorts of questions that seemed to go beyond what the IRS needed in order to grant them their tax status. And so, and what I knew then and kind of what has been reported now is that this created a climate of fear where Tea Party activists did not want to engage in politics in campaigns because they were afraid that they would be audited by the IRS. They were afraid that they would be fined and maybe even in jail if they violated something they weren't aware of. And so it really prevented a lot of Tea Party activists from getting involved in the campaigns, especially in 2012, leading up to President Obama's re-election campaign. There's no surprise about that. It was clearly a case of targeting your political opponents for political purposes. And of course, we've seen more of that in the last presidential election as well.
Interesting. And of course, we can talk about surface politics and surface parties and surface movements, but really behind all this are values and beliefs. And I'm curious, what are the values and beliefs that you saw behind the Tea Party, and what made you want to be part of that?
Sure. Definitely, I would say the values are constitutionally limited government, free markets, individual liberty. Basically, the belief that America is a special place because of our ideas, not because of our ethnicity, not because of our any other characteristics, but because of the creed, because of the ideas, the power of those founding principles is what sets America apart. And, for a lot of folks who were involved in this movement, they really didn't care that much whether, they were Democrat or Republican or independent. Many of them were across the board. Some of them were not political at all when they got involved. But the values about freedom and opportunity and prosperity were what motivated the Tea Party movement. Opposition to big government in the form of bailouts and massive spending, a government takeover of healthcare, of course, and a support for more economic liberty, more personal liberty. And this is what motivated most of the Tea Party activists that I worked with all over the country for some time.
Yeah, and it's funny these days the way narratives get shaped. I know we're at the ALEC meeting right now, and outside yesterday there were people protesting against I don't know, big business and climate, even though I don't see what here has anything to do with that. But yeah. It's funny when you talk about the idea of opposing tyranny. I think on both sides you have people, Republican or Democrat, or for left or right, whether people believe in. I think we can all agree in opposing tyranny. It's just some people have different ideas of what is tyrannical within our system. And it's interesting that the Tea Party was able to bring together people of different values under that kind of, opposing the bailout of the banks, the corruption between business and government, and also the encroaching of government into our personal lives and the kind of, our health and all these things. It was recognizing this, say, expansion of power into many areas of society that people did not want. And I think it's interesting that you called it the Tea Party because, really America during the time of the American Revolution also had similar things taking place. And you had guys of very different viewpoints coming together, and say joining together to oppose what was at the time, the government of the United States, which was the British government.
Right.
And doing so at serious risk to their own lives and their own well-being and their families, not to mention. And, I'm curious what your thoughts are about that uniting drive, that uniting idea that we can, breaking through, I guess, this partisan nature to do something totally different, which is really what you all did at that time.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you look at the issues, a lot of the issues that many Tea Party people supported and still support do cross the partisan lines. Both parties have contributed to our $23 trillion in debt. That's a big issue for Tea Party people. We need to get the debt under control. We cannot allow that to continue. It's unsustainable. So that's something that brings people together. Now, both parties, again, are responsible for that spending, but I think you also have a bipartisan coalition of deficit and debt hawks as well. Support for things like, term limits on Congress, for example, that's something that has a lot of support among all Americans and especially among Tea Party people, regardless of political party. Generally protecting individual liberty and economic freedom and remembering that is why we've been so successful. We've been successful because the private sector is what creates jobs. The private sector is what allows for prosperity to exist and to lift people out of poverty. Government should be there as a backstop for people that simply need the help if they've tried every other means through the private sector. But the idea that the government should take over every industry, from energy to healthcare to agriculture to technology, is a really bad idea, and it's very much not an American idea. We watch other countries who do that, and we see total economic collapse and failure. Venezuela being a great example, Cuba, of course, historically, China and the Soviet Union on a grand scale, North Korea. There are so many examples of where command and control economies fail miserably, and frankly hurt people and often lead to things like famine, disease, and war.
Great. And so, I'd say, how are these ideas alive today? Where does how is the spirit of the Tea Party kind of carried on in today's environment, would you say?
Sure. Well, I look back to the last presidential election, and three of the remaining candidates that were in the race, kind of toward the end in the Republican primary, were all people that shared some sense of Tea Party values. They were disruptors. They were, either defeated an incumbent or defeated an establishment Republican, if you will, in their Senate primaries, like Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio, or like Donald Trump, had never held public office and were fresh to politics, had a totally different voice than people have been hearing. And there was a sense of righteous indignation and even anger, right? That things had gotten really bad under the established order and that someone needed to go and shake things up. Ultimately, of course, Senator Cruz and Donald Trump were the last two really standing. And again, both of them had a lot of similarities in terms of how they wanted to take on the left, how they wanted to actually fight. And ultimately, the voters chose Trump in the primary and, of course, in the general election as well. So I think that, you might still have a President Trump without the Tea Party, but I don't know. I think it's a possibility that the Tea Party organization and across the country help to create the conditions by which someone like Donald Trump, a disruptor, could get in there and win.
Great. So where can people learn more about your work, as it stands right now?
Sure. Well, I have my own firm called Steinhauser Strategies. So you can go to steinhauserstrategies.com. We represent a lot of different clients in the conservative movement. I also have a personal website, brendansteinhauser.com, where I tend to opine on issues that come up in Texas or around the country. But we're continuing this battle for ideas, and I think that it's kind of a never-ending battle because just when you think that you've fixed something or you've saved your freedom in one category, the left is after you in another category. So you have to be ever vigilant when it comes to these things.
Great. Real pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Josh. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Everyone, please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.